Greetings, this is Jeff Riddle, pastor of Christ Reformed Baptist Church in Louisa, Virginia. This is an occasional series of readings from and brief notes and commentary upon Eusebius of Caesarea's The Ecclesiastical History. Here is Book 8, chapters 1 through 4. And Book 8 begins with this introduction. Having concluded the succession from the apostles in 7 entire books, in this 8th treatise, we regard it as one of our most urgent duties to hand down for the knowledge of those that come after us the events of our own day, which are worthy of no casual record. And from this point, our account will take its beginning. Chapter 1. It is beyond our powers to describe in a worthy manner the measure and nature of that honor as well as freedom which was accorded by all men, both Greeks and barbarians, before the persecution in our day, to that word of piety toward the God of the universe, which had been proclaimed through Christ to the world. Yet proofs might be forthcoming in the favors granted by the rulers to our people, to whom they would even entrust the government of the provinces, freeing them from agony of mind as regards sacrificing, because of the great friendliness that they used to entertain for their doctrine. Why need one speak of those in the imperial palaces and of the supreme rulers who allowed the members of their households, wives, children, and servants, to practice openly to their face the divine word and conduct, and, one might say, permitted them even to boast of the freedom accorded to the faith? And these they used to regard with especial esteem, and more favorably than their fellow servants. Such a one was the famous Dorotheus, who surpassed all in his devotion and faithfulness to them, and for this reason was more highly honored than men who held positions as rulers or governors. With him was the celebrated Gorgonius, and all those who, like them, had been deemed worthy of the same honor because of the word of God. With what favor one might note that the rulers in every church were honored by all procurators and governors. And how could one fully describe those assemblies thronged with countless men, and the multitudes that gathered together in every city, and the famed concourses in the places of prayer, by reason of which they were no longer satisfied with the buildings of olden time, and would erect from the foundations churches of spacious dimensions throughout all the cities. And as these things went forward with the times, and day by day increasingly grew mightier, no envy could stop them, nor was any evil spirit able to cast its spell or hinder them by human devices, so long as the divine and heavenly hand was sheltering and guarding, as a worthy object, its own people. But when, as a result of greater freedom, a change to pride and sloth came over our affairs, we fell to envy and fierce railing against one another, warring upon ourselves, so to speak, as occasion offered, with weapons and spears formed by words, and rulers attacked rulers, and laity formed factions against laity, while unspeakable hypocrisy and pretense pursued their evil course to the furthest end, until the divine judgment with a sparing hand, as is its wont, for the assemblies were still crowded, quietly and moderately began to exercise its oversight, the persecution commencing with the brethren in the army. But when in our blindness we took not the least care to secure the goodwill and propitious favor of the deity, but like some kind of atheists, imagined that our affairs escaped all heed and oversight, we went on adding one wickedness to another, and those accounted our pastors, casting aside the sanctions of the fear of God, were inflamed with mutual contentions, and did nothing else but add to the strifes and threats, the jealousy, enmity, and hatred that they used one to another, claiming with all vehemence the objects of their ambition, as if they were a despot's spoils. Then, according to the word spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord hath darkened the daughter of Zion in his anger, and hath cast down from heaven the glory of Israel. He hath not remembered his footstool in the day of his anger, but the Lord hath also swallowed up all the beauty of Israel, and hath broken down all his hedges. And according to what has been foretold in the Psalms, he hath overturned the covenant of his servant, and hath profaned to the ground through the destruction of the churches his sanctuary, and hath broken down all his hedges. He hath made his strongholds cowardice. All that pass by the way have spoiled the multitudes of the people. Yea, more, he hath become a reproach to his neighbors. For he hath exalted the right hand of his adversaries, and hath turned back the help of his sword, and hath not taken his part in the battle. But he hath also made his purification to cease, and hath cast his throne down to the ground, and hath shortened the days of his time, and, last of all, he hath covered him with shame. Chapter 2. All things in truth were fulfilled in our day, when we saw with our very eyes the houses of prayer cast down to their foundations from top to bottom, and the inspired and sacred scriptures committed to the flames in the midst of the marketplaces, and the pastors of the churches, some shamefully hiding themselves here and there, while others were ignominiously captured and made a mockery by their enemies, when also, according to another prophetic word, he poureth contempt upon princes, and causeth them to wander in the waste, where there is no way. But as to these, it is not our part to describe their melancholy misfortunes in the issue, even as we do not think it proper to hand down to memory their dissensions and unnatural conduct to one another before the persecution. Therefore, we resolved to place on record nothing more about them than what would justify the divine judgment. Accordingly, we determined not even to mention those who have been tried by the persecution, or have made utter shipwreck of their salvation, and of their own free will were plunged in the depths of the billows. But we shall add to the general history only such things as may be profitable, first to ourselves, and then to those that come after us. Let us proceed, therefore, from this point to give a summary description of the sacred conflicts of the martyrs of the divine word. It was the 19th year of the reign of Diocletian, and the month Distrus, or March, as the Romans would call it, in which, as the festival of the Savior's Passion was coming on, an imperial letter was everywhere promulgated, ordering the razing of the churches to the ground and the destruction by fire of the Scriptures, and proclaiming that those who held high positions would lose all civil rights, while those in households, if they persisted in their profession of Christianity, would be deprived of their liberty. Such was the first document against us. But not long afterwards we were further visited with other letters, and in them the order was given that the presidents of the churches should all, in every place, be first committed to prison, and then afterwards compelled by every kind of device to sacrifice. Chapter 3. Then very many rulers of the churches contended with a stout heart under terrible torments, and displayed spectacles of mighty conflicts, while countless others, whose souls cowardice had numbed beforehand, readily proved weak at the first assault, while of the rest each underwent a series of varied forms of torture. One would have his body maltreated by scourgings, another would be punished with the rack and torn to an unbearable degree, whereat some met a miserable end to their life, but others again emerged from the conflict otherwise. One man was brought to the abominable and unholy sacrifices by the violence of others who pressed round him, and dismissed as if he had sacrificed, even though he had not. Another, who did not so much as approach or touch any accursed thing, when others had said that he had sacrificed, went away bearing the false accusation in silence. A third was taken up half dead, and cast aside as if he were a corpse already. And again, a certain person lying on the ground was dragged a long distance by the feet, having been reckoned among those who had voluntarily sacrificed. One cried out with a loud voice and attested his refusal to sacrifice, and another shouted aloud that he was a Christian, glorying in his confession of the saving name. Another stoutly maintained that he had not sacrificed and never would. Nevertheless, these also were struck on the mouth and silenced by a large band of soldiers drawn up for that purpose, and with blows on their face and cheeks driven forcibly away. So great store did the enemies of godliness set on seeming by any means to have accomplished their purpose. But even such methods did not avail them against the holy martyrs. What word of ours could suffice for an accurate description of these? Chapter 4. For one might tell of countless numbers who displayed a marvelous zeal for piety to the God of the universe, not only from what time the persecution was stirred up against all, but long before, during the period when peace was still firmly established. For when he who had received the authority was just now awakening, as it were, with profound torpor, though he was in a secret and hidden manner already making attempts against the churches during the time that came after Decius and Valerian, and did not get himself in readiness for the war against us all at once, but as yet made an attempt only upon those in the camps, for in this way he thought that the rest also could easily be taken, if, first of all, he were to get the better in the conflict with these. Then one could see great numbers of those in the army most gladly embracing civil life, so that they might not prove renegades in their piety toward the Creator of the universe. For when the supreme commander, whoever he was, and was just making his first attempt at persecuting the soldiers, separating into classes and thoroughly sifting out those serving in the camps, giving them a choice whether they would obey and enjoy the rank they held, or else be deprived of it if they continued to disobey the commandment, a great many soldiers of Christ's kingdom, without hesitation, unquestionably preferred to confess him than retain the seeming glory and prosperity that they possessed. And already, in rare cases, one or two of these were receiving not only loss of honor, but even death in exchange for their godly steadfastness. For as yet, the instigator of the plot was working with a certain moderation, and daring to proceed unto blood only in some instances, fearing, presumably, the multitude of believers, and hesitating to plunge into the war against us all at once. But when he prepared himself still further for battle, it is quite impossible to recount the number or the splendor of God's martyrs that it was given to the inhabitants throughout all the cities and country parts to see. Here ends Book 8 and chapters 1 through 4. And now we'll move on to some notes and commentary. These opening chapters set the stage for Book 8. Chapter 1 provides a prelude to the great persecution suffered by the church under the Emperor Diocletian. As noted at the end of Book 7, Eusebius sees the events recorded here as marking a significant transition in the Christian movement. He begins by describing the freedom and privileges enjoyed by the church before this persecution. The Roman rulers allowed Christians to practice their faith, even as members of their own households. Christian men like Dorotheus and Gorgianus were esteemed. Spacious church buildings were constructed in various cities, and the churches were filled with worshipers. With greater freedom, however, there also arose pride and sloth. Christians began to rail against one another and break into factions. When the persecution began among Christian brothers in the army, Eusebius says that the church did not seek the favor and goodwill of God. Chapter 2 turns to the persecution itself. Eusebius notes that he was an eyewitness of the houses of prayer being cast to the ground, of the scriptures being committed to the flames in the marketplaces, and of pastors either hiding or being captured and mocked by their enemies. He notes that the persecution began in the 19th year of Diocletian's reign. That would be around the year 303, with the issuing of an imperial letter at the time of the festival of the Savior's Passion. This letter was promulgated, which ordered the razing of the churches to the ground and the destruction by fire of the scriptures, as well as threatening loss of liberty to Christian leaders and ordinary believers. Later letters instructed the presidents of the local churches to be imprisoned and pressured to make sacrifices. Chapter 3 describes the sufferings of the rulers of the churches. Some contended with stout hearts, while others proved cowardly and weak at the first assault. Eusebius gives several examples of those who stood firm in the faith. Chapter 4 notes again how early attacks upon Christians began among those in the camps, that is, in the army, with some leaving the military lest they should become renegades in the faith. A particular supreme commander is mentioned by Eusebius, and the translator and editor Olton identifies this person in a footnote as Vetarius. He, it is said, in the early stages deprived some Christians of their rank if they disobeyed the command to sacrifice to the gods, and even that this man took the lives of several Christian soldiers. In time to come, the persecution would intensify, and there would be countless martyrs in all the cities and in the countryside. In conclusion, these chapters introduce the beginnings of the devastating Diocletian persecution, which began with the imperial letters of AD 303. This persecution would include the destruction of many church buildings, many copies of scriptures, as well as producing numerous martyrs from the church's officers and laymen. Eusebius saw this period certainly as pivotal in the history of the Christian movement. Well, this brings this episode to a conclusion. I hope that this has been helpful and encouraging to those who are listening, and I will look forward to speaking to you in the next episode. Till then, take care and God bless.